The city was alive with noise, lights, and rushing feet. But deep in the forgotten alley, silence ruled. Shadows stretched across broken walls. The smell of smoke and waste hung heavy in the air. There, lying against a cracked stone, was an alien woman, her body thin and weak, her face pale like fading ash. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled, her skin once glowing with health now dull and lifeless. She looked like she had not eaten for days, maybe weeks, her breath shallow, her eyes half closed. The crowd outside passed by without care. People laughed, shouted, traded. But no one looked into the alley. To them, she was already gone. Another piece of trash left to rot. She had once been full of life. But cruel years had broken her. Her family had turned away. Strangers had called her worthless. Her world had no place for her anymore. Now she waited for the end, ready to disappear like dust in the wind. Her weak heart whispered that no one would notice. No one would remember. Her trembling hand tried to lift, but dropped again. She thought, this is it. No one will come. Then footsteps stopped. A shadow moved across her, tall and strange compared to the others. She opened her eyes slowly, and through the blur of tears, she saw him, a human, his face tired, his clothes plain and dusty from work. He stood still for a moment, looking at her, not with disgust, not with fear, but with something she had not seen in years. Concern. The woman turned her face away, ashamed, expecting him to spit or walk past like all the rest. But he did not. The human stepped closer. Bending down, he whispered softly, "Are you still breathing?" His voice carried warmth, not cruelty. The woman's lips trembled, but no sound came out. Her body wanted to give up, but her soul clung to that voice. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small bottle of water, and carefully lifted her head. Cool drops touched her dry lips, and she almost gasped at the taste. Tears rolled from the corner of her eyes, because even this simple act felt like a miracle. From the street behind, people shouted, "Leave her! She is nothing. She's already dead, human. Don't waste your time." But he ignored them, his eyes only on her. "Drink," he said softly, holding the bottle steady. The alien woman swallowed slowly, each sip burning down her throat like fire and life at the same time. Her hands shook as she tried to hold the bottle. But he supported her gently. The crowd mocked him, but he didn't move away in that dark alley. She felt something strange, something she had forgotten. Hope. Her voice cracked, weak like the last note of a dying song. Why are you helping me?" The human looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because you are still alive," he answered, "and no one deserves to fade away alone." Those words pierced her heart. For years she had been told she was useless, cursed, broken. But here was a stranger who saw her as something more. Her eyes closed again, but this time not from despair, but from a small spark of peace. The human sat beside her for a while. He didn't leave her in the cold shadows, didn't treat her like trash. He waited until her breathing grew a little stronger, until her hand no longer shook so badly. The night wind blew, carrying dust through the alley. She thought he would leave, but instead he said quietly, "You don't have to die here." The woman wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. The world had hurt her too much, and she was scared this kindness would vanish like a dream. Still, her heart beat faster, a weak flame pushing against the darkness, and for the first time in so long she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Maybe someone did see her. Maybe she was not meant to disappear. The alley that once smelled of death now carried a faint breath of life. Not much, just a whisper, but enough to begin. And so, in that forgotten alley where everyone passed her by, one human stopped, one human bent down, one human gave her water, words, and a reason to hold on. She did not know who he was, where he came from, or why he cared. But as the night grew deeper, she knew one thing. Her story was not over yet. The night air was cold, sharp against the skin. Yet in the corner of that forgotten alley, something had changed. The alien woman who had been waiting to fade away now felt water on her lips and a strange warmth in her chest. Her eyes opened slightly, still weak, still frightened, but she could see the human kneeling beside her. He had not left, not walked away, not cursed her like the others. Instead, he was still there, holding the bottle steady, watching her as if her life mattered. For her, this was confusing, almost frightening. Kindness was a thing she had not known in years. Every time someone had stopped near her before, it was only to kick, to spit, or to laugh, so why now? Why him? Her heart raced. afraid it was a trick, afraid he would suddenly pull back and say it was all a cruel joke. But he didn't. The human simply whispered, "Take more, you need it," and gently tilted the bottle again. The water slid down her dry throat, and she coughed weakly, but he didn't let go. His hand supported her head, steady and patient. She closed her eyes, too tired to fight, too tired to speak, but her body clung to the taste. Each drop reminded her she was still alive. And then it struck her. He saw her not as garbage, not as a curse, but as a living being from the street. Voices echoed again. "Human, you're wasting your time. She's worthless. Leave her where she belongs." The human's jaw tightened, but he did not answer them. His focus stayed only on her, his eyes sharp, his movements calm. He placed the empty bottle aside and reached into his worn bag. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, was a piece of bread. Not much, not fresh, but food. He broke it into small pieces and held one to her lips. The alien woman flinched, fear flooding her chest. But his voice came again, steady, soft, unshaken. "Eat. It's safe." Her eyes filled with tears because no one had offered her food in so long she couldn't remember the last time. Hunger fought against fear. Her trembling lips opened, and she took the piece into her mouth. It was dry, plain, but to her it tasted richer than any feast. Her weak hands tried to take another, but they shook too much. So he fed her slowly, piece by piece, as though she was someone precious, not forgotten, and each bite felt like a thread pulling her back from the dark pit of death. She whispered, her voice barely there. Why are you doing this?" The human looked at her for a long moment before answering. His words were simple yet powerful. "Because you're alive. And that's enough reason." Her heart stung with pain, because she had never heard such words before for years. Her worth had been measured by what she could do, what she could give, or how she could serve. And when she lost those things, everyone turned away. But here was this stranger, who asked for nothing, who gave without expecting return. It was unreal, but it was real enough to make her chest ache with something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The human stood, brushing the dust from his clothes, and looked down the alley. The crowd had moved on, but whispers still carried. He ignored them all and turned back to her. "You can't stay here," he said, his voice firm but kind. Her eyes widened with fear, because moving was impossible, her legs too weak, her body too frail. But before panic could overwhelm her, he bent down and carefully slid his arms under her. She gasped softly as he lifted her, weightless in his grasp. No one had touched her with care in years. Not since she had been abandoned. She expected him to drop her, to stumble, but he held her steady, strong and unshaken. The night outside the alley was full of stares. People pointed, sneered, muttered under their breath. Some laughed, some cursed, but the human walked forward, ignoring them all. He carried her as though the world's eyes did not exist. Each step was slow, steady, deliberate. And for the alien woman, every step felt like a miracle. The world that had left her behind now had to watch as one human carried her with dignity. Her mind, though weak, whispered one truth. This is the first breath of kindness I have known in so long. Her body, though fragile, clung to his warmth. She feared it might all vanish, that he would one day regret it. But in that moment, with his steady arms holding her above the filth of the streets, she dared to believe, not fully, not completely, but enough to take one more breath, enough to want another tomorrow. The human's small home was still far away. The road still long, but in her heart she felt a change. The alley of despair had been left behind, and in its place a path of hope had begun. All because one man refused to walk away. All because one man chose to see her. And though her body was weak, her soul whispered, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The streets were never kind. They twisted like the veins of an old scar, filled with broken stones, dripping pipes, and the whispers of people who had long forgotten mercy. As the human carried the alien woman through those streets, the night seemed to grow heavier. Lanterns flickered weakly, throwing crooked shadows against the walls. Eyes followed them from windows and corners, some filled with curiosity, others with cruelty. The human's steps were steady, but the weight on his back was more than just her fragile body. It was the weight of defying everyone who had abandoned her. The alien woman's head rested weakly against his shoulder. Her breaths were shallow but steady, each one proof she was still alive. She wanted to ask him to put her down, afraid of being a burden, but her voice refused to rise. Inside, her heart battled with fear. Why is he helping me? How long before he regrets this? What if he leaves me like all the others? Yet in the middle of these fears, there was something new. Something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. Every step he took felt like a wall between her and the cold eyes of the crowd. They moved deeper through the city, and the crowd grew louder. Some pointed, some mocked. Look at that foolish human carrying trash. He'll catch her curse, just watch. Children laughed, throwing small stones at his feet. But he did not break stride, his jaw tightened. But his eyes stayed forward. The alien woman opened her eyes just enough to see the sneers, and shame clawed at her chest. She thought of asking him to drop her, to let her fade away quietly. But when she looked at his steady face, she saw no sign of doubt, only resolve. It silenced the storm inside her for a moment. The city changed as they walked, from noisy marketplaces with broken stalls to narrow paths lit only by the moon. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The alien woman's mind drifted in and out. Memories returned. Memories of the day she was left in that alley. The voices of her family saying she was worthless. The heavy footsteps walking away. Tears formed at the edge of her eyes. Not from the present, but from the ghosts of her past. The human felt the small tremble of her body. But he did not ask questions. He only adjusted his hold, making sure she was secure. After what felt like hours, they reached a quieter part of the city. The noise of the market was gone, replaced by the soft hum of distant machines and the faint howl of the night wind. Here the streets were emptier, but the shadows seemed thicker. It was the kind of place where thieves waited and where silence felt dangerous. The human slowed his steps, his eyes sharp, scanning every corner. The alien woman noticed this, weak as she was, and for the first time in years she felt protected. It was strange to trust, but her body relaxed slightly against him. Her fear of death was still there, but it was no longer alone. There was also a spark of survival. At last, he turned into a narrow lane where the buildings leaned close. At the end stood a small, broken shelter made of stone and rusted metal sheets. To most, it was nothing but a poor man's corner. But to him it was home. And to her, in that moment, it was the difference between life and death. He pushed the old door open with his shoulder and carried her inside. The air was warmer, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and old blankets. The room was small, just one table, a chair, and a rough bed made of straw and cloth. But compared to the cold alley, it was a palace. The human gently placed her on the bed, her fragile frame sinking into the blankets. Her eyes widened at the simple kindness of being laid somewhere soft. Tears spilled again, and she whispered, Why do you do this?" The human sat beside her, his face calm though his voice carried weight. "Because no one else will," he said. "You were left to die." "But I won't allow it," she tried to answer. But her throat tightened, her words broken by sobs. In her heart, she wanted to believe him, but years of pain made it hard. Still, the warmth of the blanket, the steady glow of the small lamp, and the presence of this stranger told her something her mind could not deny. She had been given another chance. The night grew quiet, broken only by the sound of her breathing. She watched him move around the room, placing wood in a small fire pit, adjusting the lamp, preparing simple food. It was not much, but to her it felt like a miracle unfolding before her tired eyes. Every small act carried meaning. Every gesture whispered, "You are not invisible." And for the first time in so many years, she let her eyes close not from despair, but from rest as sleep pulled her under. She held on to a single thought. He did not walk away. He carried me through the shadows. The small shelter was quiet, its walls shaking gently when the wind outside grew strong. The fire pit glowed faintly, its warmth pushing back the chill of the night. The alien woman lay on the rough bed, her body weak but her heart restless. For years she had been left to rot in alleys, treated as a shadow, as a burden. Now she was inside a room that smelled of wood smoke and bread, with a human who had not walked away. Her mind could not understand it, her heart could not trust it, yet her body clung to it like the last light in the dark. The human moved around the room quietly. His hands worked with simple tools, his face calm but focused. He placed a small pot above the fire, filled it with water and a few pieces of dried vegetables he had saved. The steam rose slowly, carrying a smell she had not known in years. Food, real food, not scraps stolen from the ground. Her stomach tightened, a dull pain reminding her of how long she had gone without eating. She tried to hide the sound of her hunger. But he noticed, he glanced at her and spoke softly. You will eat soon, just hold on, she wanted to answer. To thank him, but her throat felt dry. Her eyes followed his every move, half in fear he would change his mind, half in disbelief that this was real. He stirred the pot, tasted the broth, and added the last piece of bread he had saved, letting it soften in the water. It was not much, almost nothing to anyone else. But to her it was everything. When the food was ready, he carried the pot to the table and poured a small bowl. The smell filled the room, warm and gentle. Like comfort given shape, he brought the bowl to her bed and sat beside her. Eat, he said simply, holding the spoon near her lips. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. But he shook his head. You are too weak. Let me help. Shame burned her face. Yet when the spoon touched her lips, she opened them. The taste of the warm broth slid down her throat. It was soft, salty, and filled with life. Her body shivered at the shock of it, her stomach almost crying out in relief. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she swallowed. No one had ever fed her like this, not since the days before she was abandoned. She whispered between breaths, I don't deserve this. The human's eyes met hers, steady and firm. Everyone deserves food, everyone deserves life, he said. His voice carried no doubt, no judgment, only truth. She shook her head weakly, unable to believe. But each spoonful broke a little more of the chains in her mind. Each bite whispered to her heart. You are alive, you matter, she ate slowly. The warmth spreading through her veins, her fingers clutched the blanket. Her body trembling not from weakness now, but from emotions she could not name. When the bowl was empty, she leaned back, exhausted but calmer, her stomach no longer a pit of pain, her chest no longer only filled with despair. For the first time in years, she felt something simple yet powerful, satisfaction. The human placed the empty bowl aside and covered her with the blanket. You should rest, he said. She looked at him, her voice still fragile. Why are you kind to me? He did not answer right away. He looked into the fire, its flames dancing against the cracked walls. Finally, he said, because one act of kindness can change a life, and I believe yours is worth saving. Her breath caught in her chest. The words were too much, too heavy for her broken heart. But they also lit a small flame inside her, a flame she thought had died long ago. She closed her eyes, but instead of the usual darkness, she saw light. She dreamed not of chains and alleys, but of a tomorrow where she could stand again. That night, the storm outside grew louder. The city beyond the walls never slept, but inside the shelter, there was peace. The fire burned low. The blanket held her close, and the human sat near, his presence a quiet shield. She fell asleep with tears on her cheeks, but they were not tears of pain this time. They were tears of hope, fragile but real. And in her dreams, for the first time in so many years, she saw herself alive, not fading. She saw herself walking in the light again. The human leaned back against the chair, watching her as she slept. He was tired, his body worn from the day's labor. Yet he did not regret carrying her. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be whispers, there would be threats. There would be those who wanted her gone. But he had made his choice. In this small shelter on this forgotten night, he had given her not just food. He had given her something far greater. He had given her the meal of hope. Morning came slowly. The first light of the sun crept through the cracks in the shelter's walls. The alien woman stirred under the blanket, her body still weak but no longer shaking with hunger. Her eyes opened to see the human sitting near the fire pit, preparing another small meal. For a moment, she thought it had all been a dream. But the smell of warm broth and the sound of his steady movements told her it was real. Hope, fragile and new, was still alive. She whispered, her voice soft. You did not leave me. The human looked back at her and gave a small smile. I said you were not invisible, and I meant it. Her chest tightened, tears almost rising again. She wanted to thank him. But before she could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. The door shook as someone knocked hard. The human frowned and stood, pushing it open. Outside stood two neighbors, their faces twisted with anger and suspicion. One pointed inside, his voice sharp. We heard what you did last night, human. You brought that cursed woman here. The second spat on the ground. She is worthless, a drain on food and life. You should throw her back into the streets before she brings ruin to us all. The alien woman pulled the blanket up to her face. Shame flooding her body, she wanted to disappear, to vanish before they could see her. But the human stepped into the doorway, blocking their view. His voice was calm but firm. She is alive. And she stays. The neighbors laughed bitterly. Alive? She's a burden, nothing more. Don't you see what you risk? If you keep her, others will hear, the guards will come. You will be punished. The human's jaw tightened, but he did not move. I will not throw her away, he said simply. The neighbors exchanged a look of disbelief before leaving, muttering cruel words that floated back on the wind. Foolish human. Wasting kindness on trash. Inside, silence filled the small shelter. The alien woman turned her face away, tears spilling, her voice cracked. They are right. I am nothing but trouble. You should have left me. The human knelt beside her bed, his eyes steady. I don't believe in curses. I don't believe in worthlessness. I believe in choices. He placed a hand gently on her blanket. And I choose to stand with you. Her chest trembled at his words. No one had ever spoken like that to her. No one had ever chosen her. But fear was still sharp inside her, she whispered. You will suffer because of me. The human shook his head. Better to suffer for kindness than to live with cruelty. Later that day, the whispers spread, neighbors gathered in corners, eyes turning toward his shelter with judgment. Children repeated cruel words they had heard from their parents. Some threw stones at the door. Others shouted insults through the cracks. The alien woman curled up under the blanket, her body shaking with each sound. Every shout reminded her of the life she had lived before. The pain, the abandonment, the endless cycle of being unwanted. Her heart begged him to let her go, to set her free so she would no longer harm him. But he did not. He kept the door closed, his body a shield against the cruelty outside. He worked in silence, preparing food, adjusting the fire, cleaning the small room. Each act told her without words that he had no intention of letting go. Still, her mind was full of shadows. What if the guards really came? What if he was arrested because of her? Her soul twisted in guilt, yet deep inside, the smallest part of her still clung to his words. I choose to stand with you that night. The wind carried new voices, louder and sharper. A group of men passed the shelter, their laughter cruel. She is in there, the broken one, worthless as ever. And the human protects her. Imagine that, wasting his life on garbage. Their footsteps faded, but their words remained like thorns in her chest. She turned to him, her eyes red from tears. Why do you not listen to them? Why fight for me when the whole world says I am nothing? The human sat across from her, his face in shadow, but his voice was strong. Because the world is wrong, he said. They see only what they want. But I see you alive, breathing, fighting to exist, and that is enough for me. She stared at him, her lips trembling. In that moment, the cruelty of the world and the kindness of one man clashed in her heart. The whispers outside told her she was worthless, but his words gave her a reason to hope. The night dragged on, heavy with tension. Every sound outside made her flinch. Every knock of the wind against the walls felt like a threat. Yet the fire burned steady, and the human's presence remained unshaken. When she finally closed her eyes, she thought of all the voices that had called her trash. And then she thought of his voice, clear and firm, cutting through the noise. She stays. For the first time she realized something powerful. Hope was not given to her by the world. It was breathed into her by one man's defiance, and though fear still lingered, she clung to that single truth as sleep took her. The world outside could whisper its cruelty, but inside, she had been given the first taste of belonging. The days after the whispers grew darker. Every hour seemed heavier, every sound outside the shelter sharper. The alien woman felt it in her chest, the weight of being unwanted, the fear of being the cause of danger. She tried to hide under the blanket, tried to shrink into nothing, hoping maybe the world would forget her. But the world did not forget one evening, just as the sun was dying behind the roofs. Heavy boots echoed on the street. The human looked up from the fire, his face calm but his eyes alert. The alien woman froze, her heart racing. Through the cracks in the door, shadows moved. And then came a hard knock. Open! A voice commanded, cold and sharp. It was the sound of authority. The human stood, his step steady, and pushed the door open. Outside were two guards in dark armor, their faces hidden by metal masks. Behind them a small crowd gathered, neighbors whispering eagerly, waiting to see what would happen. One guard pointed inside the shelter. You are accused of harboring the discarded, he said. That woman does not belong here, she belongs in the streets. She is marked as worthless. The alien woman trembled, her body shrinking into the blanket. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, Please, "Let me go, do not fight for me." But the human did not move aside. He blocked the doorway with his body, his voice steady. "She is alive." "And she stays," the guards laughed, their voices echoing against the walls. "Alive? She is a stain, a shadow that should fade, and you defy the order by keeping her." The crowd behind them cheered the cruelty, some shouting, "Throw her out. Punish the human too." The alien woman's chest ached, guilt cutting deeper than fear. She had brought danger to the only one who cared. Her heart screamed at him to let her go. But he did not listen. The guards stepped forward, their hands on their weapons. "This is your final chance," one said coldly. "Give her up, or face punishment." The human's jaw tightened. But his voice did not shake. "I will not give her to you." The crowd gasped. The alien woman covered her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Never in her life had anyone stood against authority for her. Never had anyone chosen her over their own safety. The guards raised their weapons, stepping closer. The human did not move. His hands empty, his stance strong. He stood as a wall between them and the fragile woman behind him. The alien woman cried out, her voice breaking, "Stop! Please, I am not worth this. I will go, I will fade, just don't suffer for me." Her tears poured, her hands clutched the blanket, her whole body shaking. But the human turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. His words cut through the noise like steel. "You are worth it, and I will not let them take you." The crowd fell silent for a moment. Stunned by the power of his defiance, the guards hesitated. Unused to such resistance from a simple worker, one growled, "You are a fool," and struck him with the hilt of his weapon. The human staggered but did not fall. Blood touched his lip, but his eyes burned with fire. He raised his voice so all could hear. "Kindness is not a crime. To protect life is not a crime." The alien woman's heart pounded, torn between terror and awe. She had begged to fade away, but now, seeing him stand bleeding yet unbroken, something inside her changed for the first time. She did not want to disappear for the first time. She wanted to fight to live. The guards, unsettled by his courage, glanced at each other. The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers spreading like fire. Some began to murmur doubt. Maybe he is right. Maybe she should not be thrown away. The human's voice had planted a seed even in the hearts of strangers. At last the guards lowered their weapons, unwilling to push further in front of watching eyes. But their words were full of threat. "This is not over, human. You will regret this rebellion." They turned and marched away, the crowd scattering behind them. The street grew quiet once more. Inside the shelter, the alien woman stared at him, her tears still flowing. He wiped the blood from his lip, his body tired but his spirit unbroken. He looked at her and said softly, "They will come again, but I will not let them decide your fate." She covered her face with trembling hands. Overwhelmed by guilt and gratitude, through sobs she whispered, "Why do you risk everything for me?" He knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Because no one else would. And because you deserve to live." Her heart shattered and rebuilt itself in that moment. She had been ready to die, but now she wanted to live, not just for herself, but because someone had chosen her. Someone had fought for her when the whole world turned away. The storm had come, the choice had been made, and though danger was not gone, hope had been born stronger than before. In the quiet after the storm, she realized something powerful. She was no longer fading. She was breathing, living and wanted. All because one human stood unbroken. The night after the guards left was heavy with silence. The shelter walls creaked with the wind. The fire burned low, and the alien woman lay awake. Her body was weak, but her heart was alive in a way it had never been before. She replayed the moment over and over, how the human stood between her and death, how his voice had cut through the cruelty of the crowd, how he had chosen her when no one else ever had. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sorrow this time, but from something new. Gratitude. The human sat nearby, his lips still bruised from the strike, his eyes tired but calm. He had faced the storm and had not broken, yet he knew more storms would come. The guards would not forget. The whispers of neighbors would not stop. But he also knew he could not turn back now. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it. As the first light of dawn touched the edges of the sky, the alien woman slowly sat up. Her body trembled, but her eyes carried a faint glow that had been missing for so long. She looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "You should not have risked yourself for me, but you did, and now I cannot go back to being nothing." The human turned his gaze to her, silent, waiting. She took a shaky breath, her hands clutching the blanket. "I want to live, because you showed me that I can." Those words were fragile, like a newborn flame. Yet to the human, they were stronger than any weapon. He nodded once, his voice calm. "Then live. Not because I carried you, but because you are worth it." The alien woman's chest tightened, her tears falling freely. No one had ever told her she was worth anything. The world had called her trash, cursed, broken, but now she had been given something greater than food, greater than shelter. She had been given the truth that her life mattered. The hours passed and the world outside began to stir. The neighbors still whispered, still cast cruel glances, but something had shifted. Some who had watched the human defy the guards now looked with quiet respect. Some avoided his eyes, ashamed of their own silence. The whispers of cruelty were still there, but mixed now with whispers of doubt, whispers of change. The alien woman felt it too. When she stepped outside for the first time, leaning on the doorway for support, the crowd stared. She trembled under their eyes, her heart racing with fear that they would throw stones or spit. But the human stood beside her, his hand steady at her back, and when she saw him there, strong and unshaken, she found her breath. She lifted her head and met the eyes of those who had once mocked her. For the first time she did not look away. The sun climbed higher, spilling light across the cracked streets. The alley where she had once been left to fade was still there, cold and forgotten. But she was no longer lying in its shadows. She was standing, fragile but alive, her body trembling yet her heart stronger than ever. And beside her was the one who had given her that chance. The guards would come again, she knew it. The world would not change overnight. But something inside her had already changed. She no longer wished for death, no longer believed she was worthless. She wanted to live, to fight, to breathe each day as proof that she had not been erased. The human looked at her and spoke softly. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." His words settled deep in her soul. Together, something she had never known before, no longer alone, no longer invisible. She was part of a bond that cruelty could not break. As the day grew brighter, she whispered to herself, "I was left to fade away, but now I walk into the light." Her lips curved into a faint smile, small but real. It was the smile of someone who had been broken and yet had found the courage to rise. And in that moment she understood the gift she had been given: hope. The story of her suffering was not erased, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now was survival, choice, and the kindness of one human who refused to let her disappear. The world had tried to silence her, but now her breath was strong. The sun climbed higher, painting gold across the horizon. The human and the alien woman stepped forward together, their shadows stretching long across the street. It was not an easy road, but it was a road of life, and that was enough. A new dawn had come, and with it, a truth the galaxy would one day learn. That even in the darkest corners, a single act of human kindness could breathe hope back into a dying soul and turn the end into a beginning.